It begins as all things do in Egypt, with silence, not the silence of stillness, but a deeper kind, the hush that settles over the necropolis after sundown, when the stars watch the earth and the earth listens back. Beneath the sands, the dead lie wrapped in line and resin, but above them walks a shadow, not one to fear, but one who watches, who guards, who remembers. His name, distorted by time, domesticated by the tongue of conquerors, is Anubis. But before the Greeks, before the Romans, before even the first kings of stone and reeds, there was Inpu or Anpu, the one with the ears pricked toward eternity. Today, many know him as the jackal-headed god of mummies, or worse, the grim reaper of Egypt. But such images are smoke and mirrors. The truth of Inpu is older, stranger, sacred. He was there before Osiris, aka Vizier, became ruler of the dead. Not in myth, perhaps, but in the hearts of Egypt's earliest priests. You see, textual and archaeological evidence show that Inpu is attested as a god of the dead from the first dynasty, possibly earlier, while Vizier's cult became dominant later in the Middle Kingdom after around 2050 BC, especially as Lord of the Underworld. In the Old Kingdom, it was Inpu who primarily oversaw embalming, necropolises, and of course, the afterlife rites. So, in the beginning, before afterlife was a kingdom, it was a silence. Had Inpu walked alone within it. And this is his story. Not a horror tale, not a spook show of bones and sarcophagi, but a tale of a god who walks between worlds, who knows every name spoken by the dying, who weighs every heart, and who stands watch over your soul long after you have stopped breathing. So come, step into the desert night with us. Let the sand whisper, let the silence speak. Names are powerful things. In ancient Egypt, a name wasn't just a label. It was an aspect of reality. To know the name of something was to grasp not of its essence. And this is why spells, hymns, and invocations often began by calling on a god's true name, not just their title, but the syllables that bound their being. And when it comes to Inpu, the deity we today call Anubis, we find ourselves facing a small library's worth of names, roots, and meanings. Beginning with the ancient name Inpu. In Egyptian hieroglyphs, the god is typically written, as you see here, sometimes accompanied by the image of a reclining jackal atop a shrine or tomb. And that canine symbol became so iconic that in early periods it was used on its own to represent the god. No phonetic spelling needed, just a silhouette, watching. And this original name, Inpu or Anpu, is what the Egyptians themselves would have said. It persisted across linguistic stages. In Old and Middle Egyptian, we find this. In Coptic, his name evolved into Anub, and then the Greeks came, and with them a new form, Anubis, which later filtered through Latin and eventually became the modern Anubis. It's a journey, not just across languages, but across worldviews, each name a little more distant from the original, a little more foreign to the land of sand and shadow where Inpu first walked. But what does Inpu mean? Well, that is still up for debate. You see, Egyptologists have proposed various meanings over the years, and not one has claimed absolute victory. One common theory suggests the name comes from the root imp, which could mean to decay, a suitable, if slightly grim, origin for a god of the dead. But others argue it comes from a word meaning royal child, linking Inpu not to the dead, but to the sacred lineage, divine birth, or eternal inheritance. And then there's the theory preserved in Papyrus Jumelhak, a Ptolemaic religious manuscript from Middle Egypt, which offers a more poetic angle. According to that text, the name Inpu is built from 3 hieroglyphs. E, which is a reed representing air or breath. N, which is a wave for water. And P, which represents a stool or mat, symbolizing the desert or dry land. Put together, they represent a triadic harmony: air, water, land, the elements of Egypt itself, the desert, the Nile, and the wind that moves between. And Inpu then is not just a god of the dead, but a spirit who walks at the edge of all things. Scholars like Georges Possener even suggested this was meant to associate Inpu with other great forces: Shu, air, Osiris or Vizier for water, and Inpu himself for the desert. It's an attempt to place him not just in myth, but in the metaphysical framework of the universe, something very common in a lot of different mythologies across the world. Of course, not all theories were so poetic. In the 18th and 19th century, some European scholars tried linking Inpu to everything from Semitic animal roots to the Coptic word for gold. Others believed it was simply an onomatopoeia, the sound of a jackal howling in a desert at night. Anupu. Now, that may sound absurd, but in a way, it's kinda beautiful. Because for people who live close to the land, close to the wildness of nature, gods didn't need perfect grammar. They emerged from the wind, the night, and the voice of the jackal echoing through tombs. And for a deity who exists between silence and howl, between death and voice, that theory might be more fitting than it appears. Now, like many gods of Kemet, Inpu was known not just by name, but by epithet, honorifics that described his roles, domains, and mysteries. Some of his most prominent titles include Inti Imen Tu, for most of the Western Earth, Hebib Jeuf, he who is upon his mountain, Nepta Jeser, Lord of the Sacred Land, Imiwit, he who is in the place of embalming, Resesht Aw, Master of Secrets, and Saan Ankh, Protector of the Dead. Each of these reflects a different phase of Inpu, The mountaintop sentinel, the embalming priest, the silent witness of judgment, the one who knows what lies beyond. He is not just the god of the dead bodies, he is the guardian of dignity, the key to the thresholds, and the presence in the dark who does not flee. So, what does Inpu mean? No one knows for sure. Maybe everything, maybe nothing. Maybe it was never meant to be understood in a modern sense. Perhaps it was only meant to be spoken in prayer, in reverence, in fear, or in awe. And when the heart of the dead was weighed against the feather of my art, maybe it was his name that echoed last in the stillness. Now, the name Inpu is one thing to speak aloud, but another entirely to see written. In the ancient Egyptian world, writing wasn't just a practical tool, it was a living power. Hieroglyphs were not symbols of speech, they were embodiments of reality. A name written in hieroglyphs was not just read, it was activated. To carve it into stone was to call it into being. This is why divine names, especially those of gods like Inpu, were often written with extreme care, sometimes even coded to protect the name's power from misuse. The standard rendering of Inpu's name in hieroglyphs would be the following, with two variations. This is transliterated as Y, N, P, V, though there are multiple spelling variants across time. And the last letter V is usually an U sound when it is in the middle or at the end of a given word. Now, the earliest versions use phonograms. Again, we have our wheat, which represents Y or E. We have the bravery line, which represents water, which is N. Then we have a rectangle, which represents a mat, Y. And finally, we have the quail cheek, which is either a V or an U sound. Again, the U is in the middle or the end of a word. Often, the name is preceded by a checker determinative. The reclining black canine you see here, atop a shrine, which is not pronounced, but adds context. This symbol isn't a sound, it's a message. This is a checker god, this is Inpu. In fact, in early dynastic inscriptions, the checker itself was enough. No sounds, no letters, just a figure. Imagine a world where one silhouette, a creature poised in eternal vigilance, could tell the reader, he is here, and the guardian is watching. As writing systems evolved, Inpu began appearing with different spellings and modifiers, especially in funerary texts. In magical contexts, the name was sometimes cryptographed, that is, written in alternate symbolic ways to hide its full power. After all, if writing a god's name calls forth a part of his essence, then writing it wrong or letting the wrong person read it could be dangerous. In this sense, the written name of Inpu was not just text, it was a spell, a safeguard, a whisper meant for the tomb. So, how did the ancient Egyptians say it? Now we arrive at one of the great puzzles of Egyptian language, pronunciation. The language of Kemet was written for millennia without vowels, while consonants were carefully recorded. Vowels were typically omitted, which means that reconstructing how names were actually spoken is like assembling a song with only the drum beats. However, thanks to Coptic, the final stage of the Egyptian language, written with the Greek alphabet plus a few demotic signs, we can glimpse some of those missing sounds. In Coptic, Inpu's name appears as Anub, suggesting a pronunciation something like Anub or Anubi. Modern Egyptologists often reconstruct the original name as Anapau in Old Egyptian and Anub or Anop in Middle Egyptian and Coptic phase. The initial consonant I, transliterated but not voiced like English y, is a glottal stop or light vowel in reconstruction, hence the symbol in the beginning. The p may have been aspirated, which means a burst of breath after the p, which would be p, and the th was likely pronounced when final as a soft oo sound. But the truth? No one can say it with certainty. Not even the most pious hiereos, which would be priest, standing before Inpu's altar today. And perhaps that's fitting, because Inpu is a god of silence, of veiled things, of names whispered and swallowed by the sands. And then there are the Greeks. When Hellenic scholars entered Egypt, they faced the same problem we do. How do you pronounce a name you can't fully read? They rendered it Anubis, adding Greek endings and smoothing over the unfamiliar consonants. To the ears, Inpu became Anubis, and in Rome, Anubis. That's the name that survives today in textbooks, video games, movie villains, and tarot decks. But it's not the one whispered in the Embalmer's tent or scratched into the lintel of tombs in Saqqara. The name Inpu belongs to the desert, the dead, and the deity who walks beside them. And while we may never pronounce it exactly as his earliest priests did, perhaps it doesn't matter, because the power of the name lies not in how we say it, but in how we remember who he is. Now, let's change the topic slightly and talk about parentage variants. If you thought your family was complicated, wait until you meet the ancestors of the gods. Now, as mentioned previously in the Nebethood, aka Nephthys journey, in Egyptian mythology, divine parentage is not always straightforward. Unlike modern narratives that insist on clean lines, this god begat that god. The pantheon of Gamut often blurs the boundaries. Gods may have multiple origin stories, variant forms, or even overlapping identities depending on region, period, or theological agenda. And nowhere is this more evident than in the lineage of Inpu, whom we so often refer to as the son of Vizier. But is he? Well, maybe. Sometimes. Okay, let's begin with the traditional line, son of Vizier and Nebethood. The most widely known version, thanks in part to Plutarch, the Greek historian writing centuries after the native priesthood had begun to decline, is that Inpu is the child of Vizier and Nebethood, that is, Osiris and Nephthys. But this comes with a scandalous twist. You see, in the narrative Plutarch recounts, Nebuchadnezzar, sister of Usad and consort of Sage, becomes infatuated with Vizier. Disguising herself as Usad, she seduces him and conceives a child, Inpu. Overwhelmed with guilt or fear, Nebuchadnezzar abandons the infant in the wilderness. He is discovered by Usad, who, of course, raises him as her own. Of course, I have to say, there would be the Greek names more appropriate to say. It is Nephthys, Isis, Sed, Osiris, and Anubis. Result? Inpu, aka Anubis, becomes the divinely adopted son of Usad, aka Isis, raised as a younger brother to Her, aka Horus, protector of the mummified Osiris, and heir to the sacred knowledge of embalming. Now, this version paints Inpu as a child born of divine transgression, redeemed through maternal love, a powerful humanizing myth in a theology often concerned with order, aka art, and balance. But it is not the only version. Now, the solar line, son of Re. In some theological systems, especially those that emerge around the Heliopolitan Enneads, Inpu is not the son of Isi at all, but rather the son of Re, the supreme solar deity. This version often appears in cosmological hymns where Re fathers various deities as extensions of his creative light and order. In this telling, Inpu becomes a solar guardian of the dead, less an underworld being and more a divine functionary of cosmic regulation. It aligns with his role as a neutral, silent witness, not vengeful, not passionate, but exact, the one who weighs the heart. Some scholars suggest this variant may have emerged to elevate Inpu's status, connecting him to the supreme deity of the state rather than the funerary god of resurrection. Political theology, after all, is not a modern invention. And then we have the feline mother, son of Bastard or Hesat. Another threat, much rarer, but attested, makes Inpu the son of Bastard, the lioness-turned domestic goddess of protection and nurture. In some cases, the name Hesat, a divine cow associated with nourishment and rebirth, replaces or even merges with Bastard. This version casts Inpu not as a child of death, but of feral compassion, born of a protective force and then tasked with protecting others in turn. It aligns symbolically. Bastard watches over the living, as Inpu watches over the dead. There are hints that such a lineage might have been promoted in regions where Bastard's cult was dominant, especially in Bubastis and parts of the Eastern Delta. Yet, it never gained widespread theological traction. Still, it leaves us with an intriguing notion. Inpu is the quiet son of the lioness, taught to guard, to wait, and to strike only when needed. There's also the Nubian variant, consort of Nebet-Hut. In Nubian theology, which preserved many Egyptian forms into the Meroitic period, which is around the 3rd century BC to the 4th century AD. Anubis is sometimes elevated not as the child of Nebet-Hut, but as her husband, the consort of the goddess who guards the night. This version reverses the Greek Ptolemaic story entirely. Rather than being born of shame and abandonment, Inpu becomes a sovereign god, paired with Nebethood in the sacred protection of the dead, like a funeral priest and priestess overseeing the body. This could be a local interpretation, a theological innovation, or a continuation of earlier strands not lost. But it serves as a reminder. Egyptian religion was not static. It lived, breathed, changed, and adapted to the cultural and political winds of each generation. And we have, of course, Usert as adoptive mother. Across nearly all traditions, one fact remains beautifully consistent. Usert raises him. Whether or not she is his biological mother, Usert becomes his divine caregiver. The image of Usert discovering the abandoned infant in the marshes and taking him to her breast is quietly profound. A goddess of healing, rising, the god of embalming, life giving herself to death, and death learning to protect life. This is more than myth, it's mystical pedagogy. Inpu learns to care for the dead because he was once rescued from it. He knows abandonment, and so becomes the god who never leaves your side. The god who watches over your body, even when your soul has long departed. So, why so many parents then? The answer? Well, because Inpu serves many roles, and different theologies wanted him to fit into different frameworks. So, as son of Vizier and Nebethood, this makes him loyal to the Osirian family and part of the resurrection drama. As son of Her, this links him to cosmic order, Ma'at, and the state cult. A child of Bastet or Hesed emphasizes nurture and protection, and as Nebethood's consort, he becomes a priest king of the underworld. And the ambiguity itself tells us something important. Inpu is not just a mythological character, he is a function, a mystery, a guardian who does not require a single origin, because he is already at the end of all things. He is the one who watches you die, and the one who walks beside you after. But even in the deepest tombs, no god exists in total isolation. Just as the living rely on family, community, and ritual companions, so too do the gods reflect one another. And Inpu, quiet, faithful Inpu, has his own constellation of divine relations. Some are companions, some are aspects, some are shadows that walk beside his name in silence. So, let's start with the least known and perhaps the most fascinating. Anput or Input, the feminine counterpart. You see, in Egyptian religion, many male gods had female counterparts who embodied their complementary force. Re had Hathor, Jehudi had Ma'at, Vizier had Usert. At Inpu, he had Anput or Input, written as Inpt. Her name mirrors his exactly. You see, the feminine T suffix marking her as his parent opposite, because in the Egyptian language, the T suffix is marking a feminine noun. She is attested primarily in Middle and New Kingdom texts, though always in a marginal role. Her iconography is rare, but in some depictions she appears as a woman. bearing a symbol of the jackal standard on her head, a visual echo of her partner. She is called Lady of the Sacred Land and Mistress of the West. In one inscription, she is even invoked in funerary rites alongside Inpu, suggesting her participation in ritual protection of the deceased. If Inpu stands at the threshold of death, then Anput may be the one who prepares it, the unseen hand arranging the linen, quieting the last breath. Unlike Usador Nebethut, Anput doesn't have a full mythology, but she doesn't need one. She exists in the space Inpu leaves open, the silence beside him. In some interpretations, she may even represent the female principle within Inpu, a subtle nod to the duality of protector and mourner, embalmer and comforter. Next, we have Kebehecht, daughter of purification. And then there's Kebehet, also spelled with a Q in Kebehut or Kebehut, whose name means cooling water or libation, a symbol of purification and renewal. She is described in the funerary texts as the daughter of Inpu, though her mother is rarely mentioned. In some versions, Anput is assumed. In others, her origin is simply mythic, but her role is crystalline. She refreshes the dead. Specifically, Kebehet is said to cool the body of the deceased and purify the internal organs during mummification. She is the sacred wash, the final breath of scented oil, the drop of water that soothes the soul after the burning fever of life. Iconographically, she appears as a serpent with a body of water, or a woman with a serpent's head, sometimes holding vessels. In a theology obsessed with balance, Kebehet stands for mercy. The dead are not only judged, they are cared for, and it is she who prepares them to face the scales. If Inpu guards the tomb, then Kebehet ensures that his soul departs with honor. Then we have Web Wawet, the opener, beside the opener. But the most intriguing and perplexing of Inpu's affiliates is Web Wawet, or Web Wawet, or Upuaut, meaning opener of the ways. At first glance, Web Wawet seems almost identical to Inpu, jackal-headed, god of the Necropolis, associated with Upper Egypt and the dead. In fact, their roles overlap so heavily that in some periods they merge, and in others they split apart again. But originally, Web Wawet may have been a separate deity, worshipped primarily in Asyut, Necropolis, and associated not just with the afterlife, but with war and royal conquest. His title, Opener of the Ways, likely began as a martial epithet, the one who opened the path for the king in battle, clearing the enemy before him like wind through reeds. Later, as theological focus shifted toward the afterlife, this way opening became symbolic, opening a road through the Duat, the land of the dead. In this evolution, Web Wawet and Inpu became theological siblings, or perhaps even aspects of one another. Some texts treat VIII as Inpu's elder form. Others cast him as a companion or assistant, and in a few cases they appear side by side, twin jackals standing guard at the head and foot of the coffin. If you remember, those are the positions of Usad and Nebethut. One opens the way for the living king, the other opens the way for the dead soul. Together, they map a full cycle, beginning of the road and sacred ends. So, is Anpu his wife? Is Kephet his daughter? Is VIII his twin or himself? Yeah, and also not quite. You see, Egyptian theology was rarely interested in rigid structure. It saw the divine world as a system of interwoven roles, identities that could change based on region, ritual, or symbolic purpose. Inpu's affiliates reflect this beautifully. They are not side characters in a cosmic drama. They are extensions of his function. Anpu, the feminine care of the Embalmer. Kebechet, the cleansing breath before judgment. VIII, the forward-moving force that opens what is closed. In the silence of the tomb, Inpu does not stand alone. These figures move with him, as shadows, as echoes, as divine family. And so, when the ritual begins, when the lining is ripped, the heart is weighed, and the way is opened, it is never one god at work. It is a procession, a sacred team, and at the center walks Inpu, the guardian whose mystery grows deeper with every step. In our modern world, embalming is often seen as clinical, a sterile procedure done under bright lights with surgical gloves and stainless steel. But in ancient Kemet, the act of embalming was not just medical, it was mystical, a rite, a performance of cosmic order. And at the center of that sacred art stood Inpu, the god who embalms not just flesh, but memory. He is called by many titles, but none more sacred than Imiwet, he who is in the place of embalming. To understand Inpu, you must understand this role not as a job, but as a divine service to the dead, and of course to the principle of Ma'at itself. So, according to funerary texts and temple liturgies, Inpu was the first to perform embalming, not on mortals, but on a god. Vizier, of course. If you remember, when Sage tore Vizier's body into pieces and scattered them across the Nile, it was Inpu, with the aid of Usad and Nebethut, who retrieved the remains. It was Inpu who dried them, bound them, anointed them, who wrapped them in linen and chanted over each fold, who performed the first opening of the mouth ritual, reanimating the corpse so that Vizier might be reborn in the afterlife. And in this myth, Inpu does not grieve, he serves, silently, precisely, devotedly. He becomes not just a participant, but a prototype, the divine figure whose actions would be mirrored by every embalmer in every tomb for thousands of years. Each time, a priest purified a corpse. Each time resin was poured or natron applied. It was not the man who did it. It was Inpu working through him, so they say. Now, the rituals of purification. Embalming in Egypt took 70 days and was divided into phases: drying, wrapping, ritual blessing. It was not simply the preservation of a body, but its transformation into a sacred object. The body was no longer a corpse, it was a vessel, a home for the Ka and Ba, the spirit parts of the individual, and Inpu's role was to ensure this vessel was fit for eternity. He was invoked in liturgies like this one, the Book of the Dead, spell, if I'm not mistaken, 151. Thou art pure, thy bones are firm, thy limbs are sound, thou art made whole by Anubis, Lord of the sacred land. Priests acting as the Sem-priest would wear a jackal-headed mask, signifying that they were not themselves during the rite. They were embodying Inpu, bringing his presence into the ceremony. The sacred tools they used, flint knives, resin jars, linen strips, were not just objects. They were extensions of the divine will. Each cut, each anointing, each wrap of cloth was a line of sacred text, written not in ink, but in movement. Now, Inpu's role was so central that objects associated with embalming became his personal symbols, chief among them the Inuit fetish. This peculiar object, a headless, stuffed animal's skin tied to a pole, often resting in a jar, was commonly placed in tombs and embalming rooms. It symbolized the removal of impurity and the transformation of the dead into something preserved, eternal. Its full meaning is still debated, but its association with Inpu is clear. It appears beside him in art, in tombs, and on economic jars used to store the organs of the deceased. And then there is of course the color black, not as a symbol of death in Egyptian thought, but of regeneration, the color of fertile Nile silt, of the womb of the earth. Inpu is black because he brings not decay, but rebirth. He does not fear the body, he tends to it, cares for it, prepares it for the road ahead. The place where embalming took place was called the VIII, the pure place, often located near necropolises, but outside the village. It was considered semi-sacred ground, where the boundary between worlds was thin. Inside the VIII, the dead were no longer simply human, they were becoming gods, and the priests were no longer simply men, they were Inpu's hands. In some rituals, the body was referred to as Osiris and then the name of the deceased, to symbolize the belief that all the dead in death followed the pattern of Osiris or Vizier and were preserved by the actions of Inpu or Anubis. In this sense, Inpu is not just a personal protector, he is the one who ensures that every soul, regardless of class or name, receives the same dignified preparation, a god of universal compassion, expressed through stillness and precision. To embalm the dead in ancient Egypt was to participate in a cosmic drama, to affirm that death was not the end but a passage, and Inpu was the actor who never left the stage. Not flashy, not thunderous, but essential. He did not judge you, he did not save you, but he made sure your body would be ready for whatever came next. In a world so often obsessed with gods of light, war, or creation, Inpu stands apart, a god of care, not conquest, of cleaning, not commanding, of restoration, not revenge, and so, in the Wabbit, with linen in hand and silence in his eyes, he does what must be done. He prepares the dead for eternity. There's something rather unsettling about jackals, even though I really like them. You see, they appear at twilight, slinking across the desert like shadows made flesh. You don't usually see them in the city, only on the edges where human dwellings give way to silence and stone. In modern thought, jackals are scavengers, unclean, associated with death and decay. But in ancient Egypt, they were something more, something sacred. Because the Egyptians didn't fear the jackal, they respected it for its behavior, its silence, and most of all, for where it lived, on a boundary between life and death. And this is why Inpu, the god who guards the dead, appears in their form. But why a jackal? The association between Inpu and the jackal is one of the most iconic in Egyptian iconography. But it's not random, it's observational. The ancient Egyptians saw the jackals lingered around tombs and cemeteries. They would prowl necropolises at night, digging, sniffing, howling. To some, this might have been seen as a threat, but to the Egyptians, it was a sign that this animal was drawn to the dead, and therefore had a spiritual connection to the realm beyond. And instead of fighting it, they incorporated it. They transformed the jackal's natural behavior into divine symbolism. They didn't say, "This animal desecrates the dead." They said, "This animal knows the dead, it guards them, it walks among them and is not afraid." So, Inpu appears as a black jackal or jackal-headed man. Ears alert, snout raised, poised in watchful silence. He's not a predator, he's a protector, the ultimate funerary sentinel. And as for the color black, as already discussed earlier, far from being morbid, represents fertility, renewal, and resurrection. The color of the life-giving Nile silt. Inpu is black because he's a god of eternal preparation, not corruption. Now, one of Inpu's most evocative epithets is Epi, Duat, he who is upon his mountain. This title refers to the Watcher, the one who sits atop the cliffs that overlook the Necropolis, gazing down at the tombs. In many cemeteries, burials were made into the sides of cliffs or hills, allowing the jackal god to be envisioned literally as above the dead, guarding them from disturbance. And this wasn't metaphor, it was topography made theology. The west bank of the Nile, where the sun set each day, was considered the land of the dead. Tombs were built there, and guardians placed on its heights. Inpu, the jackal, was imagined as perpetually present on the mountain's crest, ensuring no soul was disturbed. Even the direction matters. West or Imenet wasn't just a compass point, it was a threshold. The place the sun dies and is reborn. And Inpu was always there, waiting. Another of his titles, Nepta, means Lord of the Sacred Lands, referring specifically to the Necropolis. But sacred here, meaning Jesser, doesn't mean holy in a moral sense. It means set apart, untouchable, consecrated. The Necropolis is sacred not because it is safe, but because it's dangerous. A liminal space where the veil is thin and things dwell that do not belong in the realm of the living. Inpu then is not just a guardian, he is a liminal presence, one who can cross the line, stand at the gate, and look in both directions. He belongs neither to the living nor the dead, and that's precisely why he is the perfect guardian for both. In this sense, his jackal form is not symbolic. It is true to his essence, the animal that lives at the edge, that scavenges, not for destruction, but for continuity. Now, there is something poetic in how the Egyptians redeemed the jackal, an animal often feared or despised in other cultures, and made it divine. They saw the night howler not as a menace, but as a priest in fur, a companion to the corpse, a guide to the gates. Even the howl of the jackal, which echoes eerily across open stone, was not seen as a cry of horror, but as a call of presence, a voice saying, "I'm here, I see you, I will watch while you cannot." And not in a creepy way, mind you. You see, of course, in later periods, especially post-Greek, the jackal imagery took on darker tones. In some traditions, Inpu was conflated with death itself, although we should say Anubis, since we are post-Egyptian. Anyway, Anubis was conflated with death itself, grim, skeletal, reaper-like. Modern depictions often reduce him to a monster or a villain, similar to Hades by the way. But in the original Egyptian worldview, there was nothing evil about death, neither in Greek mythology by the way. It was natural, necessary, and the jackal god was not feared, but trusted. The one who would protect your tomb, preserve your memory, and ensure your soul wasn't lost to the sands. In the West, the dead are often feared. In Egypt, they were watched over, and watching, always watching, was the one who wore a jackal's head, not to frighten, but to promise, "You are not forgotten, I'm here." Egyptian mythology rarely shouts, it whispers, through symbols, through ritual, through fragments of text that survive like half-heard songs. And sometimes, in those fragments, we find a tale so vivid, so specific, that it shines like obsidian in the sands. Such is the case with the leopard myth, a story tucked within the dense ritual scrolls of the papyrus Umilhak, and echoed faintly in the priestly rites of embalming. It's not a myth you will find in schoolbooks or museum labels, but it might just explain something you have seen again and again, and never fully understood. So, according to the papyrus Umilhak or Umilhak, a late Ptolemaic text filled with local traditions, temple rites, and mythological variants. There's a curious tale involving Sage and Inpu. You see, Sage, the storm god and perennial antagonist of Osirian order, is said to have taken the form of a leopard. In this shape, he tries once again to desecrate the body of Osiris, threatening the peace of the Necropolis and violating the sacred silence. But this time, Inpu intervenes. He captures Sage in his leopard form, overpowers him, and flays him alive. Well, that got dark. Removing his spotted hide as both punishment and purification. The act is not simply violent, even though it is pretty violent. It is a ritual, a reassertion of Ma'at, the principle of balance and truth, over chaos. And then comes the symbolic twist. Inpu dons the leopard skin himself, not as a trophy, not as a sign of conquest, but as a sacred garment, a mantle of power and protection. It becomes the ritual robe of the Sem priest, who embodies Inpu's, the ring, the rites of embalming. This is the origin story of the leopard skin cloak worn by priests in countless temple and tomb scenes across Egypt. Now, in Egyptian temple iconography, the Sem priest is often depicted wearing a leopard skin draped over one shoulder. The spotted belt, instantly recognizable. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't even practical. It was myth made visible. The skin represented Sage power, turned to order, chaos flayed and purified by Inpu. To wear it was to claim that victory, not in violence, but in ritual. The priest, in donning it, stepped into the moment of the myth itself, defeating disorder and protecting the sacred body. The priest didn't just remember the story, he wore it. And, of course, it's tempting to treat Sage as a villain. The cosmic enemy to Vizier, the murderer of kings, the chaos bringer. But Egyptian mythology was never so binary. Sage also had divine roles: god of storms, defender of Ras Solar Vacay, necessary agent of upheaval. His transformation into a leopard, a predator associated with speed, danger, and foreign lands, is not arbitrary. It reflects his untamed energy, his refusal to be contained. By flaying him, Inpu doesn't destroy Sage, he transfigures him. In this way, the myth becomes a story of ritual mastery over chaos. Death cannot be prevented, but it can be prepared for. Threats cannot be erased, but they can be transformed into garments, into rites, into meaning. So, every part of this tale is heavy with meaning. Let's break it down. The leopard, chaos, foreignness, danger, but also strength, power, vitality. Now, the flaying, purification of a ritual exposure, the donning of the skin, the assumption of sacred responsibility, the Sem priest, a human vessel carrying out divine work, and of course Inpu, the embodiment of order that does not fear touching death, chaos, or impurity. In a way, this myth tells us exactly what Inpu does best. He doesn't avoid the unclean, he walks straight into it. He doesn't destroy the danger, He reshapes it into protection. He doesn't reject the foreign or wild, he sanctifies it. Inpu is not just a guardian, he's a reconciler, the one who absorbs the disorder of death and turns it into ritual dignity. So, next time you see a priest in leopard skin on the walls of a tomb, whether in Karnak, Saqqara or the Valley of the Kings, you will know what you're really looking at. Not just fabric, but a story, worn like armor, a memory, stitched into ritual, a myth, flayed into meaning, and somewhere in the background, Inpu watches, jackal-hatted, linen-ribbed, silent, and entirely aware that even chaos, when ordered properly, has its place in the order of things. So, in the West, we often imagine the afterlife as a gated community, a final judgment before a white-bearded deity who stamps your eternal visa. But in ancient Kemet, the afterlife was more intimate, not a place of reward or punishment, but a continuation of being, governed by balance, integrity, and truth. And at the center of the truth stood the scales, not of gold, not of steel, but of cosmic precision. And it was Inpu, not Ra, not the Vizier, not even Duty, who stood at those scales, quietly, observing. He did not speak, he did not decide, he weighed the heart of the deceased against the feather of my heart. So, first we have the Hall of Two Truths. The scene is among the most iconic in Egyptian theology, and one of the most misunderstood. It appears vividly in the Book of the Dead. I think it was spell 125, a long and intricate formula, often called the vein of the heart, and it goes like this. When a person dies, the soul travels to the Duat, the Egyptian afterlife, the shadowy, multi-layered realm of the dead. There, they are brought before Ma'at, not just a goddess, but the very concept of cosmic order and justice. In the center of the chamber stands a scale. On one side is placed the deceased Ib, which is the heart, the seat of emotion, will and conscience. On the other side, a single feather, the feather of Ma'at. The test is simple, terrifying, and profound. Is your heart heavier than truth? The one who performs this weighing, the one who gently places the heart, who ensures the balance is just, is Inpu. Now we have the silent arbiter. What makes this thread remarkable is not just its symbolism, but its tone. Inpu does not accuse, he does not argue, he does not rage. He watches, he balances, he acts. There is something almost modern in this image, a being of few words who serves not as judge, but as technician of truth. His presence offers comfort as much as fear, because unlike divine wrath or human corruption, this scale doesn't lie. If Inpu says your heart is light, it is. If it is heavy, no prayer can save you. And this impartiality made him universally respected across all social classes. Pharaohs and farmers alike wanted Inpu to weigh their hearts, not because he would go easy on them, but because they knew he would not cheat. He is the god of integrity, not in speech, but in action. Now, let's talk about the consequences. Amid the Devourer. So, what happens if the heart fails the test? Well, then comes Amit, the Eater of the Dead, a chimeric beast composed of lion, hippopotamus, and crocodile, the three most dangerous animals known to the Nile world. Pretty fitting. She waits silently by the scales, trolling ready. If the heart proves heavier than truth, weighed down by lies, injustice, cruelty, or imbalance, Inpu does not bleed. He hands it over. And if you want to know what precise sins, have a look at the audiobook about the first Egyptian deities, where I talk about the 42 assessors of my art. Anyway, Amit devours it. Not the body, not the soul, just the heart, the core of identity. This is not eternal torture, don't worry. It's obliteration. The soul ceases to be. It is not punished, it is unmade. And so, the judgment of the scale is not moral in a modern sense. It is ontological. You're either in balance, or you are not. Remember, a while ago, when we talked about duty, he was standing nearby. He was headed, scribe of the gods. It is he who records the result, writes it into divine record, and proclaims the outcome, making sure Vizier does see the result. But duty doesn't weigh. That is Inpu's task. Duty is the memory of the acts. Inpu is the hand that ensures its justice. Together, they create ritual accountability. One god acts, the other records. Neither corrupts. It is a moral system without fear. So there is something deeply refreshing about this model of judgment. There are no bribes, no hellfire, no last-minute confessions, just balance. In life, you are expected to follow my art, to speak truth, to act justly, to care for others, to avoid excess and cruelty. If you live in accordance with this balance, your heart will be light. If not, it won't. It's as simple and as terrifying as that. And now, to the final calibration. We often think of morality in extremes, heroes and villains, saints and sinners. But Inpu offers a quieter standard. Did you hold your heart in balance with the world? Because in the end, it's not about belief, doctrine or worship. It's about the weight of your actions. And Inpu, black as the night, jackal-headed and eternal, will be the one who measures it. Not with anger, not with joy, but with the stillness of someone who has done this 10,000 times before and will do it 10,000 times more. Fact, they just only because using the judgment doesn't send the soul straight to paradise. There is no harp-filled heaven or automatic bliss. There's a journey, long and complex, through caverns, rivers, doors, fires, gods, demons, riddles, and stars. And someone has to lead you, not just watch over you, not just judge you, but walk beside you, one step at a time. And that someone is Inpu. In one of his oldest and most enduring titles, Inpu is called Web Wawet, meaning opener of the ways. Now, here we must pause for a note of nuance. You see, this title is often associated with Web Wawet, separate jackal-headed deity and possible twin or aspect of Inpu, as we've explored earlier. But over time, the distinction blurred, and in many texts, the role of opener becomes synonymous with Inpu himself. What matters here is not the name, but the function. To open the way is to guide the soul, not just spiritually, but logistically. With the complex geography of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, this realm was no single realm. It was an unfolding map of gates, towers, guardians, and passages. In the Book of the Dead, the soul must know the names of doors, serpents, and watchers, or be turned away. It's not hell, it's a labyrinth, a landscape of transformation. Inpu's task is to guide. He opens the locked doors, he speaks the forgotten names, he leads the soul by the hand past threats and trials, until they reach their final goal, the field of reeds, the eternal mirror of Egypt, lush, green and fertile. But what makes Inpu's role here so remarkable is its closeness. Many gods command from afar, from his solar bouquet, Vizier from his throne, Jehudi from his scroll. But Inpu, he walks beside you, he enters the tunnels, he knows the terrain, he doesn't abandon you to your fate, he accompanies you. He's not a judge now, he's a guide. In some Roman period tombs, Inpu is shown literally holding the hand of the deceased, leading them gently toward the horizon. No grandeur, no spectacle, just presence. This image, surprisingly tender, captures something profound. Inpu is not only the guardian of the dead, he is the shepherd of the soul. He knows what lies ahead, because he walked it before. In myth and magic, threshold figures are always special. They live between, not fully in one world or the other. Aramis did in Greece, Ereshkigal ruled in Mesopotamia, Paron ferried it across the river, but Inpu may be the most ancient Psychopomp, whose role persisted with unbroken reverence for over 3,000 years. He doesn't only point the way, he opens it. He doesn't carry you, he accompanies you. He doesn't test your worth, he guides your continuation. This makes Inpu less a figure of death and more a figure of transition, a divine midwife, not for birth, but for rebirth. He is present at the moment of death, yeah, but he is also there after, when the grieving ends, when the rituals are done, when the tomb closes. That's when his steps begin. So, the Duat is a dangerous place, filled with serpents, fire lakes, and gates that require secret passwords. But it is not evil, it is transformative, and Inpu is your compass. He is the one who knows the name of every gatekeeper, the one who has seen every trial, the one who never grows tired, even after walking his path for millennia. In some versions of the Duat, the Book of the Underworld, Ra himself relies on jackal-headed deities to open the gates of night as a solar bouquet journeys through darkness. Even gods need guides sometimes. What does it mean to call Inpu a psychopomp? It means that death is not a void, it is a path. And Inpu is the one who shows you how to walk it. Not with sermons, not with terror, but with familiarity, with silence, with sure steps on sacred grounds. He does not force, he does not command, he simply opens the way and walks with you. someone that knows the way. Anthropologists call this figure Psychopomp, from Greek Psychopompos, soul guides, and though the name is Greek, the role is nearly universal. In Greece, it was Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger, who between his divine errands also escorted souls to the underworld. He was not death itself, but a neutral companion, tasked with ensuring that no soul got lost between life and Hades. In Mesoamerica, the dark-headed god Xolotl guided the dead across the 9 levels of the underworld. In Japan, of course, the Shinigami whispered to the dying. In Norse tales, it was the Valkyries who carried the fallen warrior to the afterlife. Even the Etruscans had Banth, a winged woman who lights the roads into the grave. But all of these guides, Inpu stands apart because he doesn't just accompany the soul. He prepares the body, he protects the tomb, he weighs the heart. He is the entire structure of transition, embodied in a single divine form. While Hermes glances back as he escorts, Inpu watches from the moment the breath leaves the lungs until long after the tomb is closed. He doesn't need wings or boats. He walks, steady, certain, silent, and in doing so, he reminds us that death isn't an end, nor merely a departure, but a process, a passage, a path through darkness that someone has already walked before us. There are gods whose power lies in thunder, and then there are those whose power lies in silence, in space between words, in a pause between heartbeats, in the thin light before dawn. Inpu certainly belongs to the latter. His presence is not loud. It doesn't demand temples built to the sky or hymns shouted from rooftops. It whispers through incense smoke, in the rustle of linen, in the breath of a dying man. And perhaps that is why he found such fertile ground in mystical and esoteric traditions, where hidden things are revered and symbols speak louder than words. Now, as mentioned before, one of Inpu's lesser known but deeply telling title is Ir, Secht Au, Master of Secrets. This was metaphor. As a god of embalming and the afterlife, Inpu knew things the living could not. The arrangement of the soul's parts, the hidden anatomy of the Duat, the rituals that bound the spirit to its name and form. But this title took on new dimensions in later theological and esoteric traditions, especially those that emerged when Egyptian religion began to intertwine with Greek philosophy, Hermeticism, and Gnosticism. In these systems, Inpu did not vanish. He migrated, like a shadow slipping into a new mythic shape. So, by the time of the Hellenistic period, Egypt had become a melting pot of philosophical and religious ideas. Egyptian deities were reinterpreted through Greek frameworks, not erased, but translated, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes poetically. Inpu became Anubis, and then Anubis, a hybrid god combining elements of Hermes and Anubis. You will find him in magical papyri, amulets, and of course invocations, sometimes depicted with a jackal head, sometimes as a human with a Tatukios, and Flail. In the Greek magical papyri, PGM for short, he is invoked alongside Hermes in oaths and spells. I conjure you by Hermes and Anubis, guardians of the gates. These aren't merely names dropped for flavor. Hermes and Anubis were seen as keepers of liminal passage, of dreams, gates, underworlds, and secret knowledge. Together, and they formed a divine binary of communication. Hermes brings messages from the gods. Anubis escorts souls beyond the veil. In this esoteric context, Inpu becomes a cipher of transformation, not only for the dead, but for the initiate, the mystic, the alchemist seeking to transmute not a lead into gold, but self into soul. In esoteric writings, Anubis is subtly reinterpreted as a figure of karmic justice, a spiritual accountant who oversees the cosmic balance sheet of the soul. Instead of weighing literal hearts, he weighs actions, thoughts, and choices, not for reward or punishment, but to determine one's readiness for transcendence. In one such telling, he presides not over one trial, but over 42. If you remember one of our previous journeys, I did talk about the 42 assessors of Ma'at. Anyway, each representing a principle of Ma'at, mirroring the 42 negative confessions in the Book of the Dead. This echoes both the Egyptian practice and the later Gnostic idea of passing through multiple layers of judgment, or initiation, before the soul is released. To some esoteric practitioners, Anubis becomes not a god of death, but of refinement, the one who watches as we shed illusion, attachment, and fear, layer by layer, until the soul is light enough to rise. Well, in alchemical symbolism, Inpu's role as Embalmer is often paralleled with the Nicredo stage, the blackening or putrefaction, the first and necessary phase in transformation. Just as a body must decay before resurrection, so too must the self undergo dissolution, the death of the ego, the breakdown of identity, in order to be reborn as something higher. In this interpretation, Inpu is not simply embalming the dead, he is preserving the core truth while allowing what is impure to rot away. The flaying of sedge, the preservation of his ear, the washing of the body, all become metaphors for inner work, the spiritual purification that prepares the initiate for a higher life. Inpu becomes the alchemist of the soul, silently working in the dark, where the real work always happens. So, unlike Re, who shines, Er, who strikes, Inpu does not seek attention. He is the hidden initiator, the god who does not speak, but who shows. And this made him appealing to amethysticists who sought inner gnosis, alchemists who embrace death as transformation, and mystics who found peace in silent companionship. Even in Christianized contexts, echoes of Anubis remains. In Cynocephalos saints, in black-cloaked death guides, in the continued reverence of silent guardianship. He was never raised, only renamed, and always respected. To those walking a path of mystery, Inpu is not the god of endings. He's the god who walks with you when all else has fallen away, when there are no answers left, only the journey forward, and he, as always, knows the way. There's something about him, something immediately recognizable, even to those who know nothing of Egypt, even to those who've only seen him once on a video game cover or museum placard. A tall, black figure with the head of a jackal, not snarling, not grinding, just watching. He doesn't carry lightning, he doesn't wield a sword, yet somehow everyone understands. This one is important. So, Inpu's most iconic form is that of a man with the head of a jackal, standing tall, alert, silent. The ears are always upright, pointed, attentive, as if always listening. The snout is long, angular, but not menacing. His posture, poised, dignified, not aggressive, not passive, just present. And this image isn't just stylized art, it's intentional theology. You see, the jackal, as we have seen, is the animal most closely associated with cemeteries. The scavenger that walks the edges, that smells the bones beneath his hands. But the jackal wasn't feared in ancient Egypt. It was respected because it knew what the living could not. Inpu, taking on its head, embodies that liminality. His form declares, I walk between life and death. I'm wild but loyal. I know the sand of time. This wasn't about intimidation. It was about function made visible. The head of a jackal, the body of a man. Divinity, the form of understanding. But why black? Well, in Western imagery, black is often associated with evil, death, or void. While in ancient Egypt, it meant something else, entirely different. Black was the color of fertility, rebirth, and eternity. You see, the yearly flooding of the Nile deposited rich black silt called Kemet, hence the name the Black Land, which gave Egypt its very identity. Black was the color of resurrection, not ruin. So, when Inpu is shown in black, as he most often is, it is not a sign of doom, it is a sign of life beyond death. Basically, black means the body is preserved, the tomb is fertile with memory, the soul will rise again. Some rare depictions show him in gold or with colored sashes, but the iconic black figure remains the standard. It's a visual theology. Death is not the end. It is transformation. And of course, Inpu is not just a guardian. He's also a craftsman. And like all masters of ritual work, he comes with tools. Among them, the flail, often held in a cross-arm pose, symbolizing kingship and guardianship. Not a whip, but a shepherd's instrument. And then the Inuit fetish, a rather strange object. Headless animal skin, tied by the tail, draped over a pole and inserted into a jar. It appears beside Inpu in countless tomb scenes and funerary rites. Its meaning? Well, that's still debated. But its presence is constant and sacred. And then the leopard skin cloak. We already talked about it. Worn by the Sem priests, who embody Inpu in ritual, a symbol of chaos subdued, as explored earlier in the leopard myth. And we have the Anubis masks or Inpu masks, used by actual embalmers during the opening of the mouth ceremony, linking the priest's human body with Inpu's divine one. And in all of these, we see not just visual consistency, but ritual clarity. Inpu is not abstract, he is specific, practical, sacredly functional. But before he took the humanoid shape we are most familiar with, Inpu appeared often in full jackal form, reclining atop a shrine or coffin, usually in profile. In this image, a black jackal stretched out in watchful rest became so iconic that it was used as a hieroglyphic determinative for his name, a kind of theological shorthand, so to speak. This form appears on tomb lintels, sarcophagi lids, canopic chest lids, amulets, rings, and funerary statues. In this posture, Inpu is both alert and calm. He does not prowl, he guards, and the shrine beneath him, it's usually empty, representing the stillness of the tomb, the vessel of the soul. The jackal reclines, ears erect, as if to say, "I'm here, no harm will come." So, while his core form remained remarkably stable, there were some regional and temporal variations, beginning with the Old Kingdom. In the Old Kingdom, he was primarily full jackal, a guardian of royal necropolises. Then, by the Middle Kingdom, the anthropomorphic form took dominance, meaning he became more humanoid, more human-like looking. Then, in the New Kingdom, his image became even ritualized, appearing in books of the dead, tomb murals, and statues. And finally, during the Greco-Roman period, Inpu appears more stylized, sometimes wearing Roman regalia or blending with Hermes as we already talked about, Herm Anubis. But through it all, his face remained canine, meaning dog-like, and his color black. That consistency tells us something. His function never changed. Even when theology shifted, even when empires rose and fell, Inpu remained Inpu, a jackal in posture, a priest in action, a god in silence. If theology is the voice of the gods, then artifacts are the echoes, the objects left behind, still resonating with presence. Inpu was not a distant deity, trapped in myth or metaphor. He was present, physically, ritually, iconographically, in tombs, temples, tools, and tokens of Egyptian culture for over 3 millennia. His form may be silent, but his presence is everywhere. And in the spaces made to house the dead, necropolises, burial chambers, embalming rooms, he is never absent. And perhaps the most iconic object associated with Inpu, and one that still leaves visitors breathless, is the Anubis shrine, discovered in KV 62, the tomb of Tutankhamun, found by Howard Carter in 1922. This life-size statue shows Inpu in full jackal form, reclining atop a gold-inlaid shrine box. His ears are bright, his gaze eternal. The statue was found facing west, the direction of the dead, just outside the burial chamber, as if guarding the boy king even in death. The statue's body is covered in black resin, a symbolic link to embalming and the regenerative color of rebirth. Around his neck hangs a protective necklace, and his eyes inlaid with calcite and obsidian, seemed to follow you even through the darkness. This wasn't art for art's sake. This was ritual sculpture, a divine embodiment positioned to intercede for the soul of the king and to watch. To this day, it remains one of the most powerful representations of a god doing exactly what he was meant to do. Protect the tomb, guard the sacred space, speak only in stillness. In the tombs of embalmers and priests, we find a wide array of sacred tools labeled as belonging to Inpu. Resin jars, sometimes marked with his name or image. Funerary knives, especially flint blade types, used in the opening of the mouth ceremony. Canopic jars, especially those associated with the jackal-headed Duat motif, who sometimes merges iconographically with Inpu, and head rests, often inscribed with protective prayers to Inpu to guard the sleeping head of the deceased, or eternal head. These were not mass-produced items. They were crafted with intention, placed with care, and believed to carry real magical agency. Even the cloth used in wrappings was sometimes inscribed with tiny prayers to Inpu, a reminder that every layer of the body's preparation was also a layer of invocation. And Inpu's most prominent cult center was in the 17th nome of Upper Egypt, a site the Greeks fittingly called Necropolis, literally city of the dog. Its Egyptian name was likely Esoteric, though it's not fully attested. Here, jackals were sacred, not merely feared or tolerated, but revered, sometimes even mummified as votive offerings to Inpu, after they deceased, of course. Archaeological evidence suggests that Necropolis housed a major embalming complex. It may have even supported a priesthood devoted exclusively to Inpu, performing funerary rites for pilgrims and locals alike. Unfortunately, the site remains only partially excavated, but Roman and Ptolemaic inscriptions confirm the city's divine dedication. Even in late antiquity, when temples were shuttered and the old gods exiled, Anubis, now under the new name, remained here in memory, in stone, in name. Inpu was not only honored in tombs and temples, he was invited into homes. Small faint amulets of Anubis or Inpu have been found throughout Egypt, particularly in household contexts. Some were worn on the body as protective charms. Others were buried with the deceased or placed near doorways. These amulets depict Inpu in various forms: reclining jackal-headed man, standing figure holding a flail or staff. They weren't fashionable trinkets. They were prayers in miniature, ways of saying, "Guard me while I sleep, guard me when I die." Larger statues of Inpu also appear in tomb chapels and along funerary processions carved in relief, evidence that his presence was not just theological, but domestic, personal, felt. And Inpu's form appears in nearly every major necropolis in Egypt. Saqqara, where early embalming rites were formalized. Abydos, the sacred city of Vizier, where Inpu was invoked in processions. cavern tombs, where he appears in Books of the Dead scenes, and Valley of the Kings, especially in tombs like Seti I and Ramses II, where he is shown overseeing the soul's judgment. In short, if the dead were there, so was he, and not merely as ornament, but as function. Artifacts as theology, more than any god, perhaps. Inpu's reality is proven, not in myth, but in objects. He is everywhere the dead are, in stone, in wood, in linen, in pigment. He is not just prayed to, he is present. As statue, as symbol, as silent overseer. Where there is a body to prepare, a tomb to protect, a soul to guide. There is Anubis, there is Inpu. Some gods are worshipped in temples, some are invoked in spells, and some, like Inpu, are whispered in poetry, long after the altars have turned to dust, even after the fall of pharaohs and the silencing of priesthoods. Inpu's image remains. His ears, his stillness, his black form against the sand, they lingered, not always as theology, but as symbol, as atmosphere, as grief wrapped in beauty. And the poets, ever tuned to silence, heard him. So, in the 19th century, when Europe rediscovered ancient Egypt with a feverish mix of awe and appropriation, Stefane Mallarmé stood apart. A symbolist poet, Mallarmé didn't simply mine Egypt for exotic imagery. He sought its mystical silence, its capacity to gesture at truths beyond words. In his poem, Les Tombeaux d'Edgar Poe, the tomb of Edgar Allan Poe, Mallarmé refers obliquely to Anubis-like figures, watching over the tomb, not with judgment, but with presence, still, black, eternal. No, he never names Inpu outright. His jackal-shaped silence prowls between every line. Another voice from the same century, Leconte de Lisle, placed Egyptian gods directly into verse. As a Parnassian poet, he was obsessed with antiquity, not as museum piece, but as living moods. In his poem Les Dieux Antiques, he imagines the gods of Egypt not as dusty myths, but as patient presences, forgotten but undiminished. Inpu appears here not as death, but as dignity, a figure who watches the tomb as the stars turn, who does not speak but remembers. This is the god poet understood, not a deity of dogma, but of watchfulness. A silhouette beside the coffin, a jackal who mourns but does not weep. In the Fin de siècle movement of French mystic poetry, Maurice Foucault offered an even more personal portrayal. In his verses, Inpu is not just present, he is intimate. A god who bends over the embalming table with priestly hands, who knows the names of the dead and whispers them back as balm. In one evocation line, Foucault writes, Anubis closes the eyelids of the king as a mother would her child's. This is not the Grim Reaper, this is the gentle undertaker of eternity. So, it's worth asking, why Anubis or Inpu? Why did these poets, surrounded by Greek muses and Christian saints, reach for a jackal-headed god of embalming? The answer is simple, because he is unmistakable. You see, Inpu offers something no other figure does. The dignity of death without judgment, the present at the threshold without drama, the silence that listens rather than speak. Now, it is the combination of those things that makes him so unique. For you see, he is neither savior nor tormentor. He does not demand, he does not threaten. He simply is, still, calm, eternal. And in a century obsessed with mortality, mourning and meaning, that mattered. And so, by the late 19th century, Anubis had become a symbol beyond religion, a guardian of memory, invoked in elegy, a keeper of secrets, referenced in occult societies, and a symbol of transition. Used in theatre, sculpture, and even opera, he became the patron not of the dead, but of the human fear of forgetting, the idea that someone, somewhere, still stands watch over the names we no longer say aloud. And that idea is poetry. In the hands of poets, Inpu did not vanish. He was transformed into mood, into metaphor, into the god of sacred quiet. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy of all, not being prayed to, but being remembered. The form of the old gods, if you can call it a form, is never sudden. It does not happen in a flash of lightning or the swing of a sword. It happens slowly, through silence, through renaming, through the reshaping of memory. Temples crumble, priests disappear, statues are buried or effaced. But the divine figures themselves, obviously, they don't die. They change form. And as Christianity spread across Egypt in the first centuries AD, Inpu, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead, did not vanish. He transformed, he hid, he waited. And so, by the 4th century AD, Egypt had become a Christian province. Temples were shuttered, inscriptions defaced, and rituals outlawed. The priesthoods of Inpu, Vizier, Usat, and Jyoti, aka Anubis, Osiris, Isis, and Thoth, were dissolved, the sacred sites repurposed or destroyed. And yet, Inpu, in the form of Anubis and Duat, he survived not in open prayer, but in residual reverence, as folk memory, as half-invoked fear, as a presence too quiet to burn. In rural villages, farmers still spoke of the black jackal, embalmers, even Christian ones, still used certain phrases once dedicated to Inpu, sometimes not even realizing their origins. And in cemeteries, the practice of guiding and guarding the tomb, of watching the grave through the night, remained sacred, a ritual echo of Anubis' eternal vigil. One of the most bizarre and telling echoes of Anubis appears in Christian legend itself. You see, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, there exists an early variant of Saint Christopher, who is described not as a man, but as a cynocephalus, a dog-headed saint. Early icons even depict him this way, hallowed, upright, holding a cross, and bearing the unmistakable snout of a jackal. Some scholars argue this is the accidental survival of Anubis imagery that in Christianization and the local tales of protectors and guides of the dead, the black jackal figure of Anubis was simply baptized into sainthood. Others view it as symbolic. the dog head representing the beast tamed by Christ. But either way, the visual memory of Anubis survived, just with a new name, Anubis. It wasn't only through syncretism that Anubis remains. In some regions, especially in Upper Egypt, there are traces of active resistance to Christian suppression of traditional beliefs. Graffiti scratched into tomb walls long after official temple use had ended. Miniature faience figures of Anubis buried beside Christian relics. And in one case, a tomb sealed during the 6th century bore both a Coptic cross and an Anubis inscription, as if the deceased wasn't sure which god would be on duty that night. This was not deviance in the political sense. It was devotional memory, the understanding that a god who had guarded your ancestors for 3,000 years could not simply be forgotten in 3 generations. And so, by the medieval period, Anubis no longer stood on temple altars, but he remained in the stories of the poor who still spoke of the dog who watches graves, in apotropaic charms worn by those who worked among the dead, in the fear of wandering souls whom only a jackal could properly bury, yet become less a deity and more a principle, the idea that death required dignity, that transition must be guided, that no soul, no matter how forgotten, should ever be truly alone. This principle outlived the pantheon, and so we find Anubis not in confrontation with Christianity, but in quiet coexistence in the cracks where cultures overlap. Where there was a tomb, he lingered. Where there was mourning, he listened. Where the grave stood open, he stood beside it. Not as a god demanding worship, but as a memory, too sacred to erase. And perhaps this is his greatest act of endurance, to be remembered, not as a myth, but as a presence. There's a figure that haunts Western imagination, hooded, skeletal, silent. He appears at the moment of death, scythe in hand, ready to sever the last thread of life. We call him the Grim Reaper, and of course, I've already done a few videos about various Grim Reapers, so if you're curious, have a look. Anyway, while this figure is now draped in pop culture and Halloween cliché, the core idea is far older and far more sacred. A guide who escorts the soul to the afterlife, not an agent of punishment, but a presence in transition. And in that role, the Grim Reaper does not stand alone. He is a late echo of a global archetype, the Psychopomp, and in Egypt, that role belongs not just to one being, but to a sacred chorus of deities, each entrusted with part of the soul's passage through the veil. And even though I already talked about those sacred chorus of deities in a previous journey, the first deities of ancient Egypt, I will repeat myself this time. So, beginning with Inpu, the one who walks beside. Yeah, Inpu is the most obvious candidate for Egypt's Reaper archetype, but he doesn't reap. He guides, he prepares, he stands at the gate. He weighs the heart against the feather of Ma'at. He leads the soul through the Duat. He guards the tomb until the stars rise again. His task is surgical, sacred, and utterly precise, more akin to Hermes in his Psychopomp or Psychopomp's role, then to a harvestman of lives, but he is not alone. Next, we have the wonderful goddess Nebethut, also known as Nephthys, the mourner and guardian. Often overlooked, Nebethut plays a key role in the funerary ritual, as the sister of the wonderful Usat, and consort in some myths of Sage. She dwells in liminal sorrow, the mourning goddess who calls to the dead and comforts the living. She is the divine keening voice that guides the soul toward judgment. In funerary texts, she is often standing at the head of the bier, paired with her wonderful sister Usat at the feet. Her role is not psychopompic in the literal sense, but invocational. She prepares the soul emotionally, ritually, maternally for what comes next. In some traditions, she even speaks the name of the deceased aloud, the first step in ensuring they do not disappear from memory. Next, we have her wonderful sister, Usat, also known as Isis, the magical midwife of Rebirth. While known primarily for her roles as mother and sorceress, Usat is also deeply involved in death and rebirth. She assembles the scattered body of Vizier. She protects the dead through spells, charms, and voice. She breathes new life into what was lifeless. She doesn't weigh the heart or walk the soul, but she ensures the possibility of resurrection even exists. She is the magical infrastructure of the afterlife, and in later texts, she appears as the one who guides the justified soul toward the field of reeds, especially in tandem with her wonderful sister Nebethut. Together, they form the wings of farewell, and of course, Re, the light in the Duat. Even the sun god has his moment in the night. Each evening, Re travels through the Duat aboard his solar vacay, illuminating the underworld, fighting the serpent Apophis, and reawakening the cosmic order. He is not a psychopomp per se, but his presence makes the journey possible. In the Duat, the dead follow Re's light. His journey is a model, a beacon in the dark, and in this way, Re becomes a cosmic guide whose survival ensures that every other soul may rise. Next, we have the wonderful Sekhmet, the flame of protection. Sekhmet, fierce lioness of flame and wrath, might seem out of place among these softer deities, so to speak, but presence in the Duat is protective. She is invoked as a defender of the soul, burning away corruption and guarding against enemies of Ma'at. Her role is not to guide, but to clear the path, to stand at the edge of the road and roar against chaos. In some temple rites, she is evoked before funerary procession, her heart purifying, her breath sterilizing the boundary between worlds. Also, let's not forget, she is also the goddess of healing as well. And lastly, we have two more. First, Jehuti, the scribe of judgment. A divine scribe. He does not weigh the heart, but he records the outcome. He stands beside Inpu, pen in hand, ready to write a verdict. But more than that, Jehuti preserves the names of the dead, their words and their justifications. Without his record, the soul would have no history, no voice. He is the scribe of eternity, ensuring that memory is not erased. And, of course, Vizier, the Lord of the Dead. Above them all sits Vizier, also known as Osiris, silent and crowned Lord of the Western Realm. He does not guide, he receives. Once the soul has passed the judgment, it comes before him to be welcomed, to be joined with the cycle of eternity, to become, in essence, an Osiris, a Vizier themselves. He is the destination of the journey, not the one who shows the way. So, in the West, we imagine the Reaper as one figure, cloaked and solitary. But in Egypt, there's no single Reaper, there's a procession. Inpu weighs and walks, Nebethut mourns and calls, Usat preserves and reanimates, Sekhmet guards, Jehudi remembers, Ra illuminates, and Vizier receives. No one god owns death. Instead, the journey through Duat is orchestrated like a ritual symphony, with each wonderful deity playing their part in the soul's transition. And Inpu, he is the one who begins it, the first hand to touch the body, the first step into the dark. When ancient gods reappear in modern storytelling, they don't always arrive intact. Their names are used, mostly, their forms adapted, their mythologies reshuffled like a deck of cards, and while the result can be intriguing, they are rarely faithful. Inpu is no exception. In the modern imagination, particularly through the lens of fantasy and sci-fi, he has been reinterpreted, repurposed, and often distorted beyond recognition. If there's one modern franchise that redefined how most people see Anubis, it is Stargate. In this science fiction universe, the gods of ancient Egypt are revealed to be parasitic aliens manipulating humanity through advanced technology and cultic imagery. Anubis, once the silent guardian of the dead, and under a different name, Inpu, is reimagined as a villain, half destroyed, cloaked in darkness, consumed by power. To be fair, Stargate's aesthetic is compelling. The imagery is bold, the narrative somewhat clever, but it trades reverence for reduction. Anubis becomes not a guide, but a threat, not a protector of the soul, but a cosmic antagonist. And this version stuck. Since then, countless video games, movies, and graphic novels have portrayed Anubis as a god of judgmental cruelty, a necromancer or undead overlord, a monster, jackal-headed and glowing red. It's cinematic, yeah, but it's also deeply out of tune with who Inpu, aka Anubis, actually is. In the Egyptian worldview, he's not a villain, he's safety, he is precision, he is the one who ensures dignity after death, not the one who rips it away. And these reinterpretations may entertain, but they also flatten the divine presence who deserves much better. Thankfully, not all modern reinterpretations obscure the truth. In the last few decades, there has been a quiet yet passionate resurgence of devotional practice centered around the Necero, particularly among Kemetic reconstructionists, Wiccan polytheists, and those drawn to non-Hellenic pagan rivals. In these communities, Inpu is no longer just Anubis, the cool-looking death god. He is once again the opener of ways, the ritual protector, the one who listens to grief and accompanies the dead. Practitioners craft shrines to him, often with incense, black clove, jackal figurines, and small offerings of resin or bread. Some recite adapted passages from the Book of the Dead. Others compose new hymns entirely, often beginning with a simple invocation. Inpu, guardian of the Western Gate, walk beside me. This is not fandom, it's faith, born of genuine reverence, and it shows that Inpu's memory was never fully lost, only waiting. So, perhaps the most profound act of modern spiritual work is not invention, but restoration. To take a deity who has been turned into villain, stripped of complexity, flattened into trope, and to reclothe them in truth. Inpu deserves this, so does every ancient deity. He is not a destroyer, he is not a collector of gold or a necrotic sorcerer, he is not a jackal god of horror. He is a guide who never speaks unless necessary, a guardian who never leaves the tomb unguarded, a craftsman of sacred transition, wrapping the body with more love than words can say. He doesn't need thunder, he doesn't need followers. He only needs to be remembered rightly. And now, after all these centuries, that memory is returning. Not as spectacle, but as silence rediscovered. So, there's a place where the sun sinks low, not in defeat, but in promise. The Egyptians called it the West, or Imminent, probably. The land of setting things, a direction, yeah, but also a realm, a mood, a destiny. The West, not exclusively to Egyptians by the way, was where the dead went to the rest, where life itself paused to remember, and where the gods of transition made their quiet home. And there, in that twilight stillness, before the judgment, before the gates, before the journey beyond, waits a figure with the head of a jackal, not grim, not cold, just present. This, of course, is Inpu. He has walked in this path more times than there are grains of sand in the desert. He has stood at the feet of kings and peasants alike. He has never once asked for worship, only care. Care for the dead, care for the body, care for the moment when life becomes something else. And perhaps that is his greatest teaching, that death is not a doorway to fear, but a craft to be practiced with dignity, precision, and love. Inpu does not shout from temple walls. He is not a god of thunder or creation. He speaks through the scent of incense in a quiet room, the clean fold of a linen shroud, the silence after the last heartbeat. He teaches us to tend, not to conquer, to watch, not to control, to walk beside, not to lead. He is the god of thresholds, of preparation, of gentle presence when all else falls away. And now, here we are, thousands of years after his name was first carved into stone, still speaking it, still remembering. Through distortion and silence, his image survived, not because of power, but because of grace. So, when we speak his name now, whether it's Inpu, Anpu, Anubis, or simply you who guard the dead, we do not so to summon him, but to thank him for watching, for weighing, for walking beside us through the night and into the west. May we too walk with such quiet dignity. May we remember the dead with such skill and grace. May we honor Inpu, or Anubis, or Anpu, not with fear, but with reverence. And may the next time we meet him, he find our heart's light. In the silence of the West, he waits still, but now, perhaps, not quite alone.